Welcome to week 6, the last week of the Tinsel Tree Quilt Along. Today we're going to teach you a quick way to make a stocking, just in case you have nothing else to do. And we're going to talk about some machine quilting ideas for your top. First, I wanted to go over a few tools that I like to use when I'm quilting. First is the DeLoa Jones Boomerang ruler. This is the 10-inch finished size, and this is perfect for the wall size, to do continuous curve in the wall size quilt. I also often use this other curved ruler. I'll have to look up the name. I'll post that. It's a broader curve, and you can use these together to get a pair of a shallow curve with a deeper curve, and I talk about that today. I also like this circle template. It gives me 5 different sizes, and I use this when I add ornaments to the tree as I'm quilting it, and again I talk about that when I go through how to quilt. And I often get asked about what kind of batting and what kind of thread I like to use. The batting I like to use is an 80-20 cotton. I like Quilter's Dream, and I also like heirloom cotton, but the 80-20 is what I go for. And as far as threads go, I am a new convert to Aurifil Mako 50. It's 100% cotton thread, and I have to adjust the way you quilt a little bit, but I really like the way this quilts up, and I like that it's so fine and just kind of tucks into the quilt. And the other thread I really like is Omni Thread by Superior, and this is a polyester thread, so it does do really well in the machine, but I like that it's not shiny. It's very much looks like a cotton thread. So those are the threads I like to use, the batting, and the tools. So let's get started. I'm going to give you a quick lesson on how to put together a stocking. This is our little bonus feature for Tinsel Tree. So I have my fabric that I want for the outside of my stocking and the fabric that I want for the lining. So I'm going to take the lining fabric and fold it right sides together. Make sure I have enough. Okay. And then the fabric that I'm going to use for the outside, and this could be pieced if you wanted to do something decorative. I'm just trying to show you a technique here. So this is right sides together. So it's right sides together for your outside, stacked on top of right sides together for your lining. And this is just a pattern that I drew quickly. And I'm just going to put something on top to weigh it down. And I'll cut all of this out at the same time. Peek under here, make sure. And this pattern will be on our website under Web Extras for Tinsel Tree. If you don't want to draw your own. I'm pretty fast and loose with this. Doesn't have to be exact, in my opinion. Okay, and I like the top to kind of go straight up. Now if you make your own pattern, obviously this one I have noted on here what size the cuff will be and what size the loop is going to be. So to determine how wide your cuff is going to be, if you designed your own, obviously on this pattern we note it. So I'll measure how far this is across, and it's 7 inches, but I'm going to have a 1/4 inch seam allowance on each side. So in that case, it's going to be 6.5 inches finished. So I'm going to double the 6.5 inches, so that's 13 inches. And then I need a seam allowance, so I'm going to add 1/2 inch. So I'll cut my cuff at 13.5 inches. I Have that done here. So this is going to be my cuff. Now I'm going to take my cuff and just with a 1/4 inch seam allowance stitch down the side. And then for my stocking, I'm going to leave it exactly how it is. So it's got the 2 layers of the lining right sides together, 2 layers of the outside right sides together. And if you want, you can pin this together. I don't usually bother. So I'm just going to stitch around this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. It's even better if you use a walking foot because it is a lot of layers. So I'll go stitch that together. Okay, here we are. Take the pins out. And then I'll just snip into the curves just so they collapse on each other a little easier. Trim off some of that seam allowance. So this will just make your curves smoother. And you can grade down some of those seam allowances as well. So here's the magic. You open it up to where the fabric you want on the outside, and you reach in here, pull it out. Then I go through the lining area and reach in here to get that out. So just work with it until you get all the seams pushed out. So there we go. And then for the cuff, here's the cuff stitched. I like to press this seam open. And I will fold this wrong sides together. And I want to match up my seam allowance or my stitch line. And just kind of work with it. I'm going to press this. And then I just have to worry about the little loop to hang it by. So for the loop, I have this little piece of fabric and it's cut 1 inch by 5 inches. And if you wanted, you could just use a bias tape maker to do this. I just do it since I want each one different. This is how I do it. I just press it in half, open it up, and then I'll press each side into the middle. Or you could use ribbon or a rat tail or something if you prefer that to hang it by. Fold it in half and press one more time. And I'll just stitch this down. I have all of my components done, my cuff, my stocking, and then the little hanger. So I'm going to put my cuff, I'm going to stuff it inside of my stocking. And then this I'll just work in as I sew it. And then for my hook, or my little loop, I'll just loop that together. And I'll go between my cuff and my lining. Just kind of put it in there. And I want it just to the back. I don't really want it exactly on the side. And I can put a pin in there just to hold it in while I go to the machine. And I definitely, the walking foot will come in handy for this too, because again, you have 4 layers of fabric. So you're just going to stitch around. I stitch on the inside this way through my machine, and then that's your last seam. Okay, the last seam is sewn. Just going to pull the cuff out, fold it over, and there you go. I'll press this, I'll take a little more time with it, but that is how you make, or how I make, a fast stocking, fully lined with just a couple of seams. This is the flurry version of Tinsel Tree. It's on the cover of the pattern. So this is a throw size. So when I quilted this, it's a continuous curve idea, but I used 2 curves with a little swirl just to take up some extra space. And then in the tree, I did the vertical lines. And here I did circles, but the circles are always between the branches on this, and they're single circles. And then for the topper, I outlined them and added a swirl. And in the background of the topper, continued that continuous curve idea. So this is the original Tinsel Tree quilt, long before the pattern was ever thought of. This is made with fabrics designed by Sherry Berry. They're pretty old. And for this, I followed a continuous curve idea, but instead of a curve, I kind of did a holly leaf. So if you put the 2 sides together, whoops, it's kind of like a holly shape. And I'll show that more later. In the tree, it's vertical lines, and I added balls. So they're 2 circles that are not concentric, they don't share a midpoint. They're just nested in each other, kind of offset, and just sporadically thrown around the tree. And then up here, for the topper, I did a spiral in each of the balls. And then in between the spokes, I just did these crescent shapes to fill, and used a metallic thread, which I do not do very often on this quilt. This is the last one I'm going to show. This is the wall size, but a little wider than the wall. So it's the wall size triangles with the layout of the throw. This is done with Ruby and Bee solids by Wyndham Fabrics, which is a really fun collection of solids. So for this one, for the field of triangles, it's a straight up continuous curve. I did that with the DeLoa Jones 10-inch Boomerang ruler. And then for the tree, I just have vertical lines wherever for that whole triangle. And then I just outlined up here. I didn't add the spirals, and I just continued the continuous curve behind that topper. Quilt Tinsel Tree, I load it on my machine sideways with the tree at the bottom. So I'm starting just with the field of triangles, and I always use a continuous curve strategy for the background. So for a wall hanging, I'll use a ruler, especially if it's solids, because the quilting is really going to show up. And I just traverse the row. So that pattern, I'll go up on the side, over, over, down, up, over, over, down, up, over, over, down, up, over, over, down, up, over, over, down, and then I just come back and close the triangles. And then I'll start again, over, down, up, over, over, down, up. So there's definitely a pattern, and if you mess up, it's pretty forgiving. You can just work around if you accidentally did something early, or if you forgot a path or something. So say I forget to go down up there. So when I come back, I'll just fill that in at that point. Same with this one, and then I'll come down. So that's the basics of the continuous curve. And I'll do that until I get over to the tree. So you get the idea there. Talk about some more continuous curve patterns in a minute. Now when I get to the tree, I do the continuous curve when I'm not in that triangle, the triangle that we use to form the tree. Anytime I'm within the triangle that formed the tree, I quilt that with vertical lines, and sometimes I'll put in little circles or ornaments, and I never quilt on the branches. I always stitch in the ditch around the branches. So I'll show you that. I'll come in here with some continuous curves. And then here, where I can't get a full continuous curve, I'll stitch in the ditch and come back and just pretend that went all the way down. And then for this base, I usually also do vertical lines. Okay, come up here and I'll stitch straight in the ditch on that, and then I'll start with my vertical lines. Now I'll stitch in the ditch on the branch. Generally, I stitch in the ditch down one side and then do vertical lines, and as I come up in this space, I'll backtrack to stitch in the ditch on the upper side, and then every now and then I'll add a little circle and I'll complete the lines below it. Oops, I'm not stitching in the ditch there. And I stitch in the ditch on the side to come up, stitch in the ditch down the branch, and then again vertical lines, filling as I go. And I make these vertical lines so they have different spacing. Just that way I'm not married to trying to make them all perfect. Come up the side, again down one side, and stitch in the ditch on the way up. And add a little circle in there. When I add a circle, I do complete the lines on the top and bottom. So I'll continue that and fill in the whole tree. For the topper, I always stitch in the ditch around the topper. And depending upon what design I'm doing, I'll stitch in the ditch as I go. Sometimes I will, in the background, complete the continuous curve design, which is really kind of difficult to do and easier to do as you stitch in the ditch. Here I'll come up, and then here I'll do the continuous curve, come around, continuous curve. So it's kind of tedious to do this. I've trapped myself a lot of times doing this. So what I think is easier than that, and it gets kind of clunky in there when you do that, you can come in, stitch in the ditch, and then just echo out of it. So here I'm going to go all the way around, stitching in the ditch, and then I'll just come back through and echo once or twice just to make this topper stand out. And then I'll just stitch in the ditch out here instead. And here I might just go there. This is where it gets difficult trying to figure out where you're going to stitch in the ditch. So you could go in there if you wanted and then follow this line around, come back out. Or you could just leave that section out and stay well away from the topper. Maybe just come in there. Another thing I've done is stitch in the ditch, and as I stitch in the ditch, I'll scallop, make little scallops coming out, backtracking as I need to. So go down. So down one side, and then you complete the stitch in the ditch on the opposite side as you go up. So down, and then come out. And this looks pretty nice just because it sets off the topper from the rest of it, kind of makes it glow a little bit. And then one more thing, when I come in and do these balls, I usually break the thread, start, and this is a stop-start kind of thing, and I outline these balls just to make them stand out a little more. If it's the topper, the twin size, or the throw size, I will quilt around the outside and then come in and do a little spiral. So quilt along the outside and spiral in and out. Just because that's a bigger space. So it just kind of depends on how densely you want your quilt quilted. So speaking of the throw, for this, you're going to have to do a little more than just a simple continuous curve, in my opinion, on a throw. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, make this a little bigger. So it's the same idea, but you'll come through, and this I usually freehand on a throw. And I do 2 curves. I'll come in and then do a swirl or something to take up space. And then come down. I'm just going to pretend this is the end here. And that'll take up a lot more space. And I'm going to show you one that has 3 passes. So I'll start with a shallow curve and then a deeper curve, and then I'll fill this in. So because I'm doing 3 passes, I end up coming out the right side. So as long as it's an odd number of passes, it works. So a shallow, a deep, and a fill, and maybe you could do a herringbone or a wishbone fill. So a shallow, a deep, and a fill. Shallow, 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 deep, and a fill. So that works well for the throw, just to take up some more space. You might also find that you want to stitch in the ditch on these seams. Usually using a shallow line works just fine, but if you don't like the way that seam puffs up, it might puff up, it might not, depending upon how close your curves are. So to do that, you can just come in and stitch in the ditch first. Now you're going to have to travel this midline twice. It'll come up, and I would stitch in the ditch first for everything, and then I'd come back and do my curve. So that's only if you feel like that center seam needs to be stitched down. So those are some ideas on how I go about quilting Tinsel Tree. So that's week 6. Good luck finishing up your quilt tops, making stockings. We can't wait to see them, so please share them on Instagram and Facebook with the hashtag so we can find them. We love seeing your work. And thank you for joining us in our very first quilt along. We're pretty excited about it, and we're looking forward to doing some more in the future, so come back and join us.